Bore da, dyn ni'n barod I ddechrau. Fe fyddai yn siarad yn Gymraeg I ddechrau. I will be speaking Welsh to begin with. If you need your headsets, please do avail yourself of this facility. Bore da, croeso cynnes bob un ohonoch chi i'n cyfarfod yma yng Nghas Newydd Braf I groesawu bawb yma. Dwi am hefyd eisiau croesawu pobl sydd yn cynrychioli eglwysi arall. Dwi am enwau rai os gai yn gyntaf ar gyfer cytun y parchedig Siôn Brynach sydd yn brif weithredwr. Siôn, croeso nôl atoch chi, braf cael eich cwmni. And also from the Wales Synod, Cymru, the Reverend Andrew Charlesworth. Is Andrew here? Andrew, welcome, croeso cynnes I chi hefyd. Ar gyfer yr Eglwys Presbyteraidd Cymru, y parchedig Brian Matthews, hefyd, sydd ddim yn eithron I ni, croeso Brian. Hefyd, could I also welcome Sharon Harper, who is the worldwide president of the Mothers Union, who will be here with us and speaking tomorrow in our prayers. It's a delight to welcome you in particular. Two other members of the Mothers Union are here as observers. Jenny Lane, who is the MU President for Wales, and Jenny Barton, a trustee of the Mothers Union. From Christian Aid Cymru, Jenny Weaver. Is Jenny here somewhere? Well, Jenny, wherever you are, very warm welcome to you. It's good to have you here with us in particular. We've agreed in times past that representatives of other churches are given the opportunity to speak at any time, even if not vote. It will be good to hear their contribution and their participation in our meeting. As you now know, arrangements for worship are covered by my chaplain, the Reverend James Tout, and I'm grateful to James and those who've assisted with worship, and also to our organist, Rob, who played for us this morning. A small number of non-members will be involved in speaking in some of the debates and presentations. Rather than asking for consent on every occasion, are you content once more to agreeing them corporately, being given permission to speak? I'll run through them before we give our assent or otherwise. Firstly, Professor Elwyn Evans Casey, new Vice-Chancellor of the University of Wales at Trinity St David, on item 10. I've made mention already of Mrs. Sharon Harper, Worldwide President of the Mothers Union, item 15. And of course, well known to us, the Reverend Canon Dr. Ainsley Griffiths, the Director of Faith, Order and Unity, under item 19. Are you content to give permission to all of these to participate and speak at our meeting? Please show. Are there any against? Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Turn now to agenda item 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 19th and 20th of April this year. You were asked to notify the Secretariat in advance of any changes proposed so that information could be made available before the meeting. No member has raised any point on the minutes, so our decision by a simple majority of the governing body, would you be prepared to receive these minutes as an accurate account, and would you please show? And those against? Any abstentions? I will therefore sign the minutes as a correct record of the meeting of the governing body held on the 19th and 20th of April 2023. Thank you very much. And still on and in relation to the minutes, agenda item 4, matters arising on the minutes. Once more, you were asked to notify the Secretariat by Thursday, the 31st of August, of any matters you wish to raise. No comments have been received on the minutes. I now concede the chair and hand over to the Very Reverend Dr. Sarah Roden-Jones to take over.
Bore da Galatian, it's lovely to see you all again, and it is my pleasure as we move to Agendum 5 to invite His Grace the Archbishop to give his presidential address.
Chair, thank you very much, Andrew, Archbishop of Wales. The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
The Old Testament story of Nehemiah is well known. It tells the story of a young Hebrew who's been deported from his homeland. And in the city of Susa, in modern-day Iran, he learns that Jerusalem is in ruins and that the returned exiles are as broken as those city walls. In turn, he's devastated by the state of things, but tears become resolve. And that is where the story begins. Recent readings of this well-known story have tended to point out some of the detrimental consequences of Nehemiah's later work, such as how he reasserted an overly racial understanding of inclusion in the people of God. But as a story of challenge and opportunity, it's possibly unrivaled in the Old Testament. And of course, in the focus on rebuilding walls, it's very easy to skirt over deeper themes which might resonate with us. Don't read this story about the ills of cementitious mortar or the difference between list A and list B. There are strong themes here about prayer, lament, how to deal with opposition, holding one's nerve in the face of hostility, team building, and utilizing resources, however meager they may seem. I want to commend, if I may, the story afresh to governing body, the story of Nehemiah. And we're going to relate to this story today, and probably at different levels. The ministry or mission area leader who beholds the task and feels beleaguered by those meager resources. The scale of the task, the lack of resources, it seems daunting. The phrase running to stand still is no longer funny, if it ever was. The archdeacon, in that impossible role of standing in the gap, operational demands alongside painful strategic decisions about change management, living in the gap, mosaic-like. The bishop, managing an operation which expands as the resources contract, wondering which to tackle next before the next one comes left field. And to this list we could add the staff, I'm sure, in the National Office, and of course our colleagues in St. Padden's too. But this story is instructive. And I want to frame this address and some of the questions we face and priorities we're progressing from within his story. God willing, in the interaction between the written word and our own context, we may hear the living word speaking to us afresh today. Let me pick up on the new funding made available for us in the diocese to break new ground. That is for the purpose of evangelism. Criteria which now the bishops, the RB and the Standing Committee have all agreed will allow for a wide expression of the task of bearing witness to Jesus Christ. Wide, but holding us to it firmly. The bids which dioceses might make can be of varying kinds, but all must retain that essential character of making Jesus Christ known. And this might mean that the generation, the embryos, might be from within the mission and ministry areas. They may come through the simple activities with which we engage week by week: baptisms, funerals, weddings, pastoral contacts. They might have a character of being pioneering, There may be church planting, and they all originate from within the mission and ministry area. Some will be a direct expression of diocesan plans. A mixed ecology of outreach is going to be more contextually significant and provide a much better base from which to share our hope than a simple and single approach. But this is what we ask, that all of these must align and sit within that broader strategic set of objectives that each diocese holds. Let me return to Nehemiah, because when the author saw that the walls were in ruins, he didn't do nothing. He knew he needed a plan. And it was essential that he combined as many elements as he possibly could. Raw materials needed reutilizing, staff time allocated, tasks timelined. The story tells us there was a deficit of skills requiring investment. Human ingenuity and creativity were critical. This became a shared enterprise and not a go-it-alone activity. People became personally committed stakeholders in the enterprise. Governing body, one of the things that we do notoriously well is just when people say that we're on the back foot, there is an outbreak of ingenuity, of creativity, of marshalling and mustering all of our gifts, of calling into being things that were not, of utilizing those on the margins at the center. We are good at this. I'm sure that Nehemiah, when he looked at the task before him, must have paled. But he found that God was able to do immeasurably more than he could ask or imagine, and what was not came into being. And as we consider the potential for doing church well across the province, there are going to be some new challenges that we've not had to face. And the first of these, I think, particularly in relation to that significant funding bid, is around recruitment. People with the capacity, with the skills, the heart, and the mind to work with us in what is exciting and enterprising but demanding. You see, there was a time when we had a natural pool, a feeder base through our colleges of higher education, through universities, through other Christian foundations, all producing a significant number of vocations to diverse ministries. But this is not the case today. The ministry officers in St. Padans are working so well, but there is another tier beneath their work, which we need to develop together. And so I'm really grateful that the ministry bishop has agreed to a new conversation about what a provincial conversation and strategy might look like as we seek to develop and grow a new corpus of leaders, new licensed lay ministers, new pioneers, new people who can break new ground with us, that the blend of church life might speak richly of the mercy and the economy of God. The second is that our existing workforce, our ministry and mission area colleagues, need enormous support in the work that they do. What we're asking from them is significant. That period in which Christendom once flourished, and the gentle and faithful repetition of church life guaranteeing people who would come through our doors is long gone. It has passed by. And so we can no longer be simply reactive in our ministry. Laser-like focus, an articulated approach to ministry which is intentional. A resilient and missional mindset like this involves the many, but is, I think, easy to speak about
and very difficult to enculturate and to maintain. You see, institutions, somehow by their very nature, they create inertia. Maintaining the system happens almost invisibly and becomes our default, and any hope of breaking new ground recedes beneath a mountain of tasks, one after the other, which seem unending. And I have more to say about this in just a moment. But we've seen that things can develop. We've seen and learned more about teams in the last 10 years than we probably ever knew previously. We understand what it means to collaborate on ministerial tasks, to reduce isolation, to create new potential for tasks which cannot be done without a rich blend of lay and ordained together. And that is why our mission and our ministry areas are so important. They allow us to do together what we could not do apart. They invite a new cooperation of people who serve in teams in a way that we've never purposed, nor structured, nor provided for nationally ever in our life. And this is an exciting prospect to bring to birth. Dwi am siarad yn Gymraeg, os gwelwch yn dda. I'm going to speak in Welsh now for a while. Rhan o her neu y mae wrth gwrs oedd asesu maint y dasg a wynobodd yn gywir ac yn y gynhwysfawr. Roedd gofyn y cwestiynau cywir yn y caniatau gwell mynegiant o'r sefyllfa ac yn ei dro rai atebion y deallus. Ac mae 2 o'r datblygiadau mwyaf arwyddocaol yn y 6 mis diwetha yn adlewyrchu'r yr un agwedd. Y cyntaf yw bod y Pwyllgor Sefydlog a chorff y cynrychiolwyr wedi cefnogi ffurfio grŵp blaenoriaethau gweithredol. Mae hwn yn grŵp gorchwil a gorffen sydd wedi bod yn edrych ar sawl maes allweddol o fywyd yr eglwys. Yn gyntaf, ein strwythur llywodraethu canolog ac all gwaith ac arfer corff y cynrychiolwyr ar y Pwyllgor Sefydlog gyd gyfeirio i ddod â rhannau strategol ac ariannol yr eglwys ynghyd. Yn ail, nodi ffactorau gweinidogol allweddol sy'n caniatáu i ardaloedd gweinidogaeth ffynnu. Mewn perthynas ar ailfaes hwn, mae'n ymddangosiadol bod ychydig o egwyddorion syml ond hanfodol yn holl bwysig. Iechyd ysbrydol yr eglwysi fel enghraifft. Trefniadau llywodraethu syml. Perthnasoedd cydweithredol allweddol o fewn yr ardal gweinidogaeth. Ac ymrwymiad rhagweithiol cryf i ymgysylltu ar ardal trwy ei gynllun gweithredu cenhadaeth. Unwaith a bydd ein gwaith wedi ei gwblhau, byddwn yn cymeredwy o'r egwyddorion hyn i'r dalaeth a'r esgobaethau. Bydd yr ail datblygiad yn gweld y gymuned dysgu esgobaeth neu y dalaeth yn ymgynnull yn ddiweddarach eleni. Mae hwn hefyd yn ddatblygiad newydd sy'n dod ag enghreifftiau da o bob rhan o'n heglwysi ni, ynghyd mewn ymarfer gwrando a dysgu. Rydym wedi gwahodd cyfranwyr o'n caderlannau, cyd-destunau trefol a gweledig, yn ogystal a phlannu eglwysi fel y gellir rhannu arfer gorau. Nifyr math hwn o cyd-gweithrediad strwythuredig o'r blaen, sy'n ein galluogi i rannu'r pethau sydd wedi gweithio, a lle mae anhawsterau a heriau wedi eu chwynebu. Nid yw ein hanes bob amser wedi cynnwys cystadleuaeth iach a nodweddir gan rannu hael a gonestrwydd. Dylai diwylliant newydd o gefnogaeth i'w gilydd ar draws yr esgobaethau ddod yn normadol ac nid yn eithriadol. Bydden nhw'n sicrhau bod y gwersi a ddysgur yma yn bwyd yn ôl i'n hesgobaethau mewn modd cyson. Un dynamig a wynebodd Nehemia oedd gwrthwynebiad. Banaeth ati i ailadeiladu muriau Jerusalem. Roedd yna rai oedd am iddo fethu. Mae'r testyn yn dweud bod hyn wedi ei brofi rhannol gan wawd a coegni ac arbrydiau gan ylyniaeth llwyr. Parodd Nehemia gleddfau i'r adeiladwyr pe bain y dod i gyffion, ond dwi ddim yn rhagweld y bydd angen gwneud yr un peth yn yr eglwys yng Nghymru. Mae'n hawdd, wrth gwrs, i ni dynnu llinellau o ffiniau a gosod rai ohonom ar yr ymylon fel y rhai sy'n gwrthwynebu pob arloesedd, sy'n anodd fel petai, a rai sy'n gymwyn esgar ac yn gefnogol. Ond ni fydd y pob sefyllfa yn caniatáu atebion hawdd, clir, na hyd yn oed cywir neu anghywir. A gallai byw gydag ansicrwydd fod yn anghyfforddus, ond mewn gwirionedd mae'n arwydd o eiddfedrwydd a ffydd. Y gwrthwynebiad gwirioneddol, y bygythiad mwyaf, yw nad ydym yn gwneud unrhyw beth. I ni ddim yn methu a mynychu mewn unrhyw ffordd obeithiol i'r heriau yr ydym i gyd yn ei profi. Nid yw'r waliau mewn cyflwr da, ac mae angen i ni roi sylw iddynt. I want to update the governing body too on the work of the church to respond well to our climate emergency, and there are, of course, things to celebrate. It is now 2 years since we divested from fossil fuels, a major development of public witness and an achievement. That action didn't seem possible even a few years ago. We've set ambitious goals and we've made some good early progress. The governing body also voted for our net zero ambition. We have a 10-point plan to spur us into action and a carbon calculator, the energy footprint tool to guide our plans. But I have to report to governing body that take-up of this tool so far has been very slow. Fewer than 10% of our churches have completed the energy footprint tool. It's an easy action to take. It's not long or burdensome. It does show us where we are and how we can get to where we want to be. If we are going to be serious, if we are going to lead in relation to net zero, we need 100% take-up. So my challenge to the GB and to our church today is to complete this action by Christmas 2023. I want to be able to report back to GB that the take-up has been 100% by next April's gathering. We are well on course to host the All Wales Climate Summit that I referenced in my last address to you in the second part of 2024. This will focus essentially on the health of our waterways, the impact of industry, agriculture, and residential domestic use on the Welsh landscape. The BBC this morning, perhaps you saw, were featuring 3 examples of the extraordinary discharge which is happening through the water companies, and an ageing infrastructure which is making it very difficult for our beaches, our rivers, our lakes, our watercourses all together to provide the kind of landscape which benefits not only wildlife or human activity, but our health and our wildlife. I include a separate note for your attention on the meetings we've hosted thus far and those who are likely to be present, who are experts or have a significant contribution to make to the debate. A steering group has been formed already, assuming responsibility for drawing together the kind of programme which ought to engage us in an intelligent and honest conversation. Surely, one of the great challenges that we face. This 2-day event plan should allow activists, academics, pressure groups, stakeholders to listen together and, God willing, find not only a common language, but agree broad principles that allow policy and direction to emerge. Now, we might wonder why such an undertaking is desirable or possible. One of the things which constantly surprises me is how we are perceived by others. Our life, the Church in Wales. Not universally so, perhaps, but on the whole, our work is very well regarded. Our capacity and our commitment to show what human society could look like is well understood and appreciated. And we know that our task is not simply to gather for prayer and breaking of bread on Sundays. Our commitment is to justice, to our creation, to the poor, and to going into uncomfortable places. That is what the kingdom of God looks like. Nehemiah understood this all too well. The prophetic character of his work is instructive. Imagination was realized in simple and measurable basic steps. Yes, his story, it has a kind of an earthiness about it, which is little different from the steps that we need to take too in the church. And I do want us, as a church, to take a lead here, to be known as an exemplar of outstanding practice. And in Wales, where we've got an opportunity to redesign our whole approach to energy, to water, to food, to land use, to sustainability at every level. We don't need to be the experts, but we do know what it looks like to bring people together in conversation. We signpost well, and our role as people whose neutrality invites confidence is something we ought to celebrate. So let me come full circle and go back to Nehemiah once more, because here his greatest gift of all is offered to us. What he offered was a deeply spiritual ministry. So when he heard about the state of the exiles and of the walls, he wept. When he gathered the inhabitants together, they prayed. When the tasks were identified, they worked together with focused energy. And yet he was, the narrative records, cupbearer to the king, little to suggest he would rise to the challenge of renewing the physical and the spiritual life of the nation. And what lies at the heart of our life, isn't it, is a belief in our true and living God, that God loves us and this world, that a relationship with God is not only possible, but is open to us gloriously in Jesus Christ. Everything else flows from this one conviction. And in the context of the Nehemiah story, the walls, they weren't the point. They existed for a purpose. And so do we, which is to declare the wonderful, glorious coming of Christ, who is in our midst, breaking out around us. And a church which is alive to this and focuses on the tasks and works well to meet them well is a church which is walking in the light. Governing body, this is our task. This is what we are called to here today. And it falls to us to respond well. God, give us grace. Amen.
Diolch yn fawr eich gras. Thank you very much, Archbishop. We now have half an hour, if we wish to use it all, as an opportunity for members to interact with our President about his address. That is through asking questions or making comments, should we not avail ourselves of the full 30 minutes before the coffee break, can I stand on notice those who are involved in question time that we might be coming to you earlier than you might have anticipated? So, opportunities to ask questions or make comments. If you could keep these fairly crisp, but would you like to come and line up at this side, and we'll see how many people are wanting to respond, and we can take you either singly or in batches, depending how great the enthusiasm is. So now's your chance. Please do come forward. Thank you, thank you. The ball is rolling. Please remember to introduce yourself and where you're from or under what flag you are flying.
So Rosie Diamond, cleric, Diocese of Bangor. I want to speak to start with in Welsh. Wel, diolch Archesgob am anerchiad gwych. Mae'n mor galonogol clywed beth sy'n mynd ymlaen. A diolch I chi, a diolch I bawb sy'n gweithio mor galed I rhoi'r strwythurau yn ei lle. Dwi just efo sawl cwestiynau, really. Dwi hefyd yn dwlu ar stori Nehemia, ac mae wedi helpu fi yn llawer dros y flynyddoedd diweddar yn cyd-deithio efo'r cynulleidfaoedd sy'n gweithio mor galed I sefydlu ardaloedd weinidogaeth. So, cwestiwn cyntaf, really, yw dwi'n cofio ffrind yn deud wrtho fi yn y coleg diwynyddol, tro ar ôl tro. Cofio, Rosie, lament, imagination, transformation. Lament, dychmygu, trawsffurfio. A dwi just, y cwestiwn cyntaf yw gofio sut mae'r lament, sut mae'r galaru yn edrych I ni yn yr eglwys yng Nghymru. Os dwi'n credu dyma'r cam cyntaf a hefyd y gweddio. Yr ail cwestiwn, ar ôl gweddio, ar ôl galaru, naeth Nehemia mynd I siarad efo'r brenin Artaxerxes I ofyn am adnoddau ac yn y blaen. Pwy yw Artaxerxes I ni heddiw? So dyma'r ail cwestiwn. And just trydydd cwestiwn yn Saesneg, so trwy i'r iaith arall. So Nehemiah went to rebuild the walls, and as you just alluded, in a sense the walls weren't the important thing, but it is really important for us to identify our task. And I wonder if we're still focusing too much on rebuilding walls of tired church buildings. You've just talked about the brilliant plans for the climate summit next year. What about the land that we own as a church? We still have so much of this precious remaining land. In my own area, 2 church gardens, which are part of that 3% of waxcap grassland that is remaining in Wales. So just the third question, should we be concentrating more ar tirwedd, more on the land and less on rebuilding the walls? Diolch o galon.
Grace.
That was outstanding, thank you. Let me start with lament. A task without a vision is dreary. A vision without a task is a dream. And I think one of the things that most impresses me in the Nehemiah story is the way in which there is this deep blend of what we might call, it's slightly dualistic, the spiritual and the practical. And there is nothing more animating in the life of our churches than when people understand the wonder and the mercy of Jesus Christ. And we are called as a church to the renewal of our lives in the image of Christ. If all we try and do is somehow revitalize through ambitious plans that have no heart, that have no human transformation, if people do not perceive they are loved by God, called from darkness to light, in the words of Paul to the Colossians, then I don't believe there is going to be anything worthwhile at the end of it. There is something deeply spiritually energizing about knowing who we are in Jesus Christ. And so that's the place of start, as I think Nehemiah teaches us, and shows that before we venture, there needs to be a sense in which we are caught up in the great story of God. But people animated in that way find it very easy to break new ground because it's all about sharing the thing that has come to us, the gift that we've been given. So I think as a church, it's about holding these two things together in tandem. Because if all you have is vision, after a while it fails. Because you've got to have some output, you've got to have something to show for it. You know, vision is a little bit like the energy drink. If you don't run, it just makes you feel sick. You know, you just OD on great things, but you never actually see it landing anywhere. That's one of the great stories, parts about Nehemiah, is that it lands very practically and well in the rebuilding and, of course, the transformation of their life. What a great question, Rosie. Who is our Artaxerxes? We do believe, don't we, that God is in the world, reconciling people, and that it is not that we are the ones who are the repository of grace without which nothing can happen. The task of the church is to keep in step with God, whose kingdom breaks out here, there, and everywhere, and to be alive to joining in what God is doing. So the transformative work is wherever there is injustice, there needs to be something done to confront the powers and principalities and the strongholds where the kingdom of God somehow is kept at bay. I've been raised this, with colleagues yesterday. I've been very struck at what's been happening down outside Stradi in Llanelli. I'm going to get myself into real trouble now. So is there a delete button here? There is a task to go down in what is a complex and difficult situation about a community that is very troubled and a community that has come in from the outside. Now, I'm not offering a solution here, but I do believe that if Christians are not going in and praying there, then we've got something wrong. If we are not visible, holding the face of Jesus Christ in a complex, demanding, difficult, something's gone wrong. And I might have to go there myself fairly soon. Perhaps some of you might like to come with me, because we ought to face Jesus Christ in that situation. So our Artaxerxes are wherever we see there is open door or where there is opposition. And last but not least, what do we do with our resources? We do have land, but I've been constantly blessed by seeing some of the creativity in your own area. It was a joy to share with you, Rosie, in the service before the Eisteddfod, to see in which the whole of that area had been opened up. When we are able to use our territory well, want to communicate that well to governing body, then I think we somehow evidence the ancient story that is ours. Our buildings are no longer just bricks and mortar. They tell a story. My wife Naomi has just produced some prayers recently for Bro Patrick, all about retelling the story, Patrick's prayers. It's a great story. And when people come in, we want them more than have a visitor experience. We want them ushered in to the kingdom of God. And when we use all of our resources in that way, I think we're on the right lines. I hope that was crisp.
Thank you. Here is the next person coming. Well, as you make your way forward, I'm going to sort of marginally abuse my position as chair by offering a slight additional thought on Artaxerxes that struck me. That was the person to whom Nehemiah went for permission and resources. In a sense, the RB has already been our Artaxerxes in the 100 million for 10 years. We have got the permission, we've got the resources. what's holding us back. The task is now to go for it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's been a really interesting address, and I feel very excited about it. I suppose my question, well, it's not so much a question, it's more of a comment. As a team vicar looking after a church that has struggled out of the pandemic, it's lost its church hall, so it has no facilities. I'm trying to work with them at sort of encouraging their confidence. And I think one of the really valuable things that I've been involved with in the last year or so, Bishop Cherry, sorry I didn't say who I was, I'm sorry, Kate O'Sullivan, priest, Monmouth Diocese. Bishop Cherry has sent 4 of us on a programme called Reconciling Mission, which, and we team up with other people across the country in similar positions. It's using an assets-based community development approach to mission and ministry. I'm not sure if I may be teaching people to suck eggs. It's basically looking at the assets and God's work that's already happening in our community and joining in with that and not feeling that we've got to have all the answers. And I think the church over the years has very much regarded its community as a people in deficit. They don't have God, we've got God, and we need to come and put you all right on a few things. But the assets-based approach recognises that the community, God is already working in the community with people who perhaps don't even know that God is working through them. And I think there's this, in terms of our local environment and our local community and our churches, it's a wonderful way of drawing people together to work on something that everybody can get behind. So, for example, in our church, we're exploring a mini library, having one outside. We're starting inside first, we're going outside. We're talking about turning part of our churchyard over to wildflowers. That led on to a discussion about what about a community orchard? Let's put in some benches. We have graves to contend with, but there are spaces. But it's a way, we can work with the community, make this a community project. And I think, because sometimes our church communities, when, if I go back and talk to them about what you've just discussed, they'll go, we're all too old. So it's actually, I think, the assets-based approach really, really works and really feeds into this sort of stuff. And actually, I'd like to see more dioceses taking this up. So that's just my comment.
Kate, just a very, very quick response to that. What is new, I think, for us in the Church in Wales over the last, perhaps, 15 to 20 years is the concept of being, intentional about our life. And once upon a time, we didn't need to be particularly intentional because our seasons and our frameworks of liturgy and life really continued and allowed our momentum to progress. I think now we're no longer able to rely on those as once we were, because they're not held by anyone else outside of the church. So I think engaging with the world takes us into the territory you've described, being intentional about it.
Good morning. Thank you so much for your address earlier. I'm really excited
about
about
introduce yourself, please.
Oh, sorry. I'm Grace from the Diocese of Llandaff. I'm really excited about what you spoke about in your address, but I just wondered if you could maybe perhaps shed a bit more light on the pioneering of lay leaders and what that would look like and when it was planned to be actualized. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do so, thank you. The question was about pioneering. God loves wondrous variety. I think the extraordinary place in which we find ourselves in Wales today suggests that we could, I think, harvest a great deal of what is currently happening in Wales and baptise it. So I would want and expect to see a raft of new chaplaincies, because I think the world of education is changing and the nature of chaplaincy is still, I think, relatively unexplored. I think pioneers who work particularly with the younger age groups in a way that is grounded. We're fairly familiar, I think, in times past with our youth and children workers. But perhaps we've not always been able, this is the great challenge, the seamlessness between children's work and into, I think, early adulthood is a very challenging time. So I would expect us to invest well in there, so we don't see confirmation as the passing out, rite, but rather the act of inclusion. I think it's enormously exciting that we're seeing in 2 dioceses in particular what church planting looks like. There was a time when it was put to me, you can't do that in Wales. It's not our culture. And 2 dioceses have shown that that isn't true. It's not the only game in town, but it's a really important bit of exploratory and exciting work. And I'm so grateful to the Diocese of St Asaph and Llandaff for being venturesome and courageous. I think we need to develop our church planting model even beyond where it is now, because I'm sure that we've only just begun to see what kind of planting could take place within the life of God's church. One of the things that we've lost over the years is we've lost that the engaging with people at their places of work, what were once called industrial chaplaincies. And I'm not quite sure if there's been any study on why those have faded, but it seems to me that in a world in which most people spend most of their time still at work, we need to try and break new ground there, work out what a model of Christian presence looks like in the workplace. And so my invitation to the governing body and to the diocese would be, have a go. Try and explore what that might involve, because I'm sure there'll be some institutional learning, some good learning about how the incarnational model of Christian life issues in then a more redemptive expression, incarnation and cross-working in tandem. I think there's something rich to be harvested there. So, Grace, I think that's the kind of territory that we'll need to explore. Some of it is quite familiar, some less so, but it's not either or, it's both and. Alongside, of course, that week by week, parish priests, lay people, witness to Jesus Christ in Sunday worship. And when people come to church, in the breaking of the word and the breaking of the bread, he makes himself known. If we are alive to that, thanks be to God.
Good. Somebody else. Can I ask, if you are planning to come speak, if perhaps you could come and linger at this table so that we've got a sense of who is still to come? That would be very helpful. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for the address and the words you've said. I'm Ruth Coombs. I'm a cleric and I'm co-opted onto the governing body. Nehemiah was very practical, as you say, and what's kind of rattling around my head is this mixed ecology of outreach. And I'm thinking that we've now got a real opportunity to look at the diversity or lack of visible diversity in the church. If we look around this room, a lot more people look like me than would have done a few years ago, but we don't look very diverse outwardly. So why would we be attractive to people who don't look like us, don't talk like us, don't act like us? And I think there's a really good opportunity, if we're really clever and careful with the way that we monitor the use of resource schemes, to try and do some targeted work so that we can grow the diversity and so we reflect better the different communities in Wales. And I think that would be a benefit to all of us in this room and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think in my address, I was at pains to point out the very thing that you've just commended to us again, which is that I think our our ability to allow our mission and ministry areas to be the generators of good mission ought not to be underestimated, but that doesn't pit them against the diocese. The diocese themselves, I think, will want to own some perhaps larger plans, more strategically developed plans. These oughtn't to be in opposition. They can live together. Thank you for your comment.
Reverend Justin from Newport, right? From Monmouth Diocese, if you don't know where Newport is. And thank you very much, Archbishop, for very thought-provoking address. I just wanted to raise a couple of issues that were concerning me, because there's a balance, I think, that's needed when we talk about conversations, consultation, listening to one another. If we spread that message out, I don't think it's necessarily going to be well received by a lot of people. I think there's a fatigue when it comes to, oh, we're going to have a chat about this. Let's listen to each other. I think that's in the church, and I think it's in society too. I wanted to quote some wisdom from somebody, well, you probably recognize the lyrics. A little less conversation, a little more action, please. Also, close your mouth and open up your heart, said Elvis. And I think he's got a point. I also wanted to ask what you meant by recruiting leaders, and how we balance that really by about releasing, not just recruiting, but releasing people, and presumably leadership in every level of the church, because we do have leaders, and leaders are, sometimes we think we've got them in short supply, but I think there are people there in leadership in all sorts of different ways in our churches, and they need releasing. And lastly, just to plug the idea of partnership a bit more, so that we're coming alongside, as you said, other organisations, other groups, other churches, and working with. I think a lot of our engagement with a lot of the key issues in society must be done as a partnership. Otherwise, we're sort of doing it to people rather than with people. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Let me pick up on the first point in particular about the conversation. One of the things that we've not had in the church in Wales is an opportunity for us to hear and see the good things that are happening across the whole of the church. And I'm conscious that our cathedrals, just give one example, are doing quite outstanding things with liturgy, with a modern interpretation of choral work, the way in which they're, I think, embodying a community that has the potential to reach out in a way that some don't. Now, how do we know? How do we learn and see and think, that might work in my context? I could take some of that. It's not the same, but there are going to be some Venn diagrams here. So the purpose of the learning community is for us to be able to learn what good practice looks like. And that's why we've included a very broad spectrum, not just cathedrals, because not everyone wants to be part of a cathedral or thinks that a cathedral is the model that's right for them. We've got some rural and town, and we've got some church planting models. The cascade is really important because it's where the cascade happens well and where people get a vision of what's possible, that I think we get the transmission or translation from merely talk into action. Because you're right, people are fatigued. We don't need to do more, we just need to do different and smarter. Warm to what you said about partnerships, and I think the scheme that the RB and the Bench and Standing Committee have commended both invite dioceses to work together and churches across Wales to partnership together on new and exciting things that we've not had the chance to do before. So, for example, recently talking to one of our Presbyterian sisters, extraordinary to hear the plans for some of the pioneering appointments that they're looking at. Well, they're doing pioneering, we're doing pioneering. Isn't there a symmetry here? Couldn't we be doing this together and sharing some responsibility? Those conversations need to take place. So I just want to commend that as you have.
Bob Evans, lay member, Monmouth, and as chair of the Monmouth DAC Archbishop, I must tell you that cementatious mortar is something you need to keep an eye on. Anyway, my point was about the planned climate summit, which I think is a great idea, although I have to say when I mentioned it to the congregation on Sunday, they didn't exactly burst into spontaneous applause. And that made me think, what is it that we can do as a church in Wales to bring a distinctive perspective to this issue? And I think the answer has already been touched on this morning. We are, as a church, present in every community in the province. And this is very much a local issue. Climate plays out differently in Barry than it does in Usk, in Bodvari, across the province. And one of the things that we can bring is the local voice of people who are concerned about issues to those national and provincial bodies who are going to be at the summit. Now, it seems to me if we're going to do that, then actually we need to start now. We need to start to have that conversation, and we need to formulate some coherent perspectives of local issues that we can bring to the summit and debate and inform our discussion. So really this is a plea to start now with that engagement and not to have a top-down process but a bottom-up one. Thank you.
Let me take my cue from your bottom-up. Probably most people don't know that there are a huge number of wildlife trusts in Wales. And because we care passionately about the creation, God's gift to this universe of something truly extraordinary, we need to find ways in which we can work with, again, the partnership idea. Those who perhaps are experts, they're always looking for people to become involved. And the wildlife trusts are people who care deeply about our environment, about our ecology of life and diversity, and the way in which water really is at the foundation of both with land. The water is really at the heart of how we generate a landscape that is blessing for its future. And so I do want to commit from the bottom up participation in the kind of life which can see a sea change. There are going to be really difficult issues that we'll need to face. The security of our food supply will be the next big issue in the next 10 years. We've seen what happened in Ukraine. And ensuring that we're able to provide food into the future at an affordable price will be an enormous issue for the whole of Western Europe. And it will be for us in this country as well. We've got really big questions to grapple with about the kind of agriculture that we think is most appropriate to enable a sustainable approach to our land. And those better qualified than me need to be participating in that kind of debate. But that doesn't mean that we don't have a role to play. When we get involved in local schemes, whether it's around gardens that Rosie mentioned, or about partnering to check in on the state of our rivers, we're doing something really good. It's an outrage. It's an outrage that we spew millions of gallons of sewage into and onto our beaches. And it's happening at dry periods as well as wet periods. It's not storm overflow discharge always. We ought to be angry and saying something about that. This is an opportunity to do so.
Thank you. We've got 3 minutes before coffee, so I'm going to ask the 1, 2, 3 of you to come forward and give all 3 of your comments, questions in rapid fire, and then a single response, please, if you don't mind. So going for that to come up.
I've never been asked to rapid fire as an Archbishop. I'm not sure it's a good idea. Richard Mulcahy, Diocese of Monmouth. This was going to be in Welsh, but I ran out of words. Very quickly, I have been involved over the years in many different funding processes which all involve application forms and long lists of things that have to be added in, and my worry is that the places that we want to make the most use of the funding that's available are the ones who are probably the least able to fill in non-complex applications all the time. Ever since the 1990s, every bit of money that we've handed out has been by competition. I would rather see cooperation. You talked about cystadlu iach. I would rather see cydweithio iach, healthy cooperation, rather than a competitive format.
Thank you.
Geraint John, the Diocese of Llandaff. Archbishop, you remind us that the biggest threat to the church is that we do nothing, but doing something takes courage. And Keith Lamdin, in his book on Christian leadership, talks about Christian leaders being people who are discontent, who have a vision and have courage to put that vision into action. I think that the church has done quite well at encouraging us to be discontent. It's done quite well at encouraging us to have a vision. But what does resourcing courage look like? How do we encourage courageous discipleship, courageous leadership, and move forward then beyond our visions to a place of courageous growth?
Thank you so much. This is Bashir from Swansea St. Mary Church. First of all, comment, it was a nice presidential address, and this is my first time here in this meeting, in this conference. People used to come to church before this, in the olden days, but now the church should go to the people. This is one thing, and of course, church is doing a wonderful thing for the people, but in this age, there are so many people from different countries, from different ethnic groups. I'm from Pakistan. And the church should raise voice also for the persecution, the people who are being persecuted for their faith in Pakistan. Especially there are 20 or 30 churches were vandalized by a Muslim mob, and more than 300 families and houses were burned down and looted after that. So how can we become the need of the people? This is my one question. The second question is, just please raise voice for those people who are being persecuted in the world, especially in different countries and different regions. Thank you so much.
And very quickly, thank you so much for referencing the situation in Pakistan, and the Archbishop of your province has been in touch with the primates of the Anglican Communion, and the Archbishop of Canterbury has written, and I understand maybe planning to visit, and we do pray for you. I can commend if others use it, they will know perhaps to what a useful resource the Open Doors prayer guide is for Christians who are persecuted. It's a rich resource. We use that on a daily basis, and I think part of our commitment, part of being prophetic, I think, is being able to stand alongside Christians who are suffering in the world. So thank you for drawing our attention to that. How do we become courageous in terms of our life? When Elijah wanted to align himself to what God was doing, he allowed himself to be taken into the wild, waterless place. And there he was fed by the ravens, the unclean, the unexpected. And yet that dependence and leaning on God birthed a story that was extraordinary. We have to go into some wild places. We have to be leaning ever more upon God. and we have to be alive to the times. That's how we become courageous people. We discover in action that God is able to do more than we ask or imagine. And Richard, we ought to have, you're quite right, we ought to have endless godly cooperation which allows us to do together what we can't do apart.